So good, so good, so good.
Spring styles are at Nordstrom Rack stores now, and they're up to 60% off. Stock up and save on Rag & Bone, Madewell, Vince, All Saints, and more of your favorites.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
Why do we rack? For the hottest deals.
Just so many good brands.
Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
So he was a kind of catastrophic mess, actually. So then he gets sent home in disgrace after this weird incident, which may or may not actually have been deliberate.
This is the Spy Masters podcast, and I'm Paul Burke, your host. Follow and subscribe to listen to everything spy-related, fact and fiction. And so to today's topic. We're back with Antonia Senior discussing Stalin's Apostles, a brand new book about the Cambridge Five, which you may have noticed is picking up rave reviews everywhere. Surely the most notorious spy ring of the 20th century. Burgess, Philby, MacLean, Blunt and Cairncross. So in the first part of the podcast, we reached the point where Burgess and MacLean realised it was time to flee. We talked about dispelling the myth that these spies didn't know what was going on in Stalin's empire. How as spies they helped Stalin's cause during the Second World War and shortly after, by giving them intel on the Allied approach to everything, and how their treachery led to the deaths of many people in the Baltic states, Ukraine, even Albania. And so with apologies for keeping you waiting for the dramatic conclusion to this story, let's get back and chat with Antonia Senior about Stalin's Apostles. Because there are some truly fascinating details about what happened after the point where Burgess and MacLean fled. And then, of course, Philby fled. And Antonia has raided the latest information for that and come up with some unique research of her own too, which we find out. Hello and welcome back to Spy Masters, Antonia.
Lovely to be back, Paul.
Are you refreshed?
I am very refreshed, excited.
So we left on a cliffhanger, which is always a good thing to do when you have episodes. And basically we discovered that MacLean was now under suspicion. So how about we pick up there and let's see where we go.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So yes, it's becoming obvious to Kim Philby in the beginning months of 1951 that they're going to be able to work out that this is Donald Maclean. Now, Donald Maclean, meanwhile, he had been in Cairo as a very young, kind of brilliant guy in the embassy. He's effectively number 2 in the embassy. Brilliant guy, expected great things. During the day, he was managing, perfectly happy to hold down his job. In the evening, he was going on insane benders. He was found wandering barefoot through Cairo. He was just in all sorts of trouble. He, on one occasion, was on a kind of boat trip that went wrong down the Nile, and he strangled his wife, Melinda, in front of everybody. And one of the other guys from the embassy had to pull him off, and he fell on top of him and broke his leg. So he was a kind of catastrophic mess, actually. So then he gets sent home in disgrace after this weird incident, which may or may not actually have been deliberate on his part, where he trashes with his friend Philip Toynbee. He trashes this American girl's flat and then is found sitting in bed with Philip Toynbee, giggling, eating a leg of mutton. So this being the British Foreign Office, he's sent home.
They sort of frowned on those things.
Yeah, they didn't love it. I mean, you're supposed to get pissed. You're just not supposed to get pissed enough that you end up eating mutton in bed. So he is sent home in disgrace, although it's kind of not really disgrace. He's sent home with very loving notes between kind of grandees at the Foreign Office going, he's a splendid chap, but, you know, I think he just needs rest and relaxation, maybe some green fields. He's basically a terrible alcoholic, and when he gets home, people see him and they're shocked by the state of him. Arguably, it's because Maclean also knows at this stage that the net is closing because he's been alerted by Philby about the Venona investigation. Now, they start off with a kind of big list of people that it could be, and the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And Kim Philby's trying to distract and trying to do what
Yeah.
he can in ways that later become sort of seen as obviously a bit suspicious. There's one poor guy in the Foreign Office called Gore Booth, who it sort of comes down to it's either him or Maclean, and the investigator in Washington says, well, Gore Booth is very suspicious. Nobody likes him very much, and he's a teetotaler. Terrible behavior, right? So it becomes obvious that this is not going to end well. In the meantime, Guy Burgess has also failed upwards at the Foreign Office, like Donald Maclean, because Donald Maclean, when he goes home, by the way, is made head of the American department.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So Guy Burgess has also been censured for being drunken and out of control, and is given a promotion to go to America, to Washington, to become second secretary there. So he has been in Washington behaving terribly in the usual Burgess fashion, which now that he's old, fewer and fewer people are finding charming and funny, and more people are just finding very ridiculous and annoying. And Philby and Burgess go out one night for a Chinese meal, just as Burgess is about to be sent home in disgrace because he had this weird incident where he nicked a car and ran about the place getting speeding fines. And Philby at that over a Chinese dinner says to Burgess, this is really dangerous stuff. Maclean is about to be fingered. You're going home anyway. You need to find a way to tell him it's coming. It's coming soon. He's going to have to leave. And at that meeting in that Chinese restaurant, Philby apparently said to Burgess, whatever you do, don't go with him. If you go with him, we're so screwed, because at this point, Philby has no connection to Maclean. He has strong connection to Burgess, right? So Burgess gets a slow boat home and has an affair on the boat with a young American boy called Bernard Miller, which isn't actually relevant, Paul. I don't know why I told you about Bernard. Okay, but he was.
But he did anyway.
He did anyway.
It was Burgess being Burgess.
He was nervous about his entire life collapsing. So what does he do? He has sex with a young American boy called Bernard. So he gets home. Donald Maclean has been up to that point he's being watched now, right? Because the list has shrunk.
Right, yeah.
Being watched by MI5. They set the watch on him at the end of April, and every day he's behaving quite well. They watch him as he arrives at Victoria. They don't put a watch on his house because it's too it's out in the countryside, and
it's too obvious in the location.
And I think that's actually, they get grief for that, but I've actually been out to sort of have a spy on that house myself, and I think it's fair enough. It would be quite difficult to have
surveillance that wasn't just obvious. Yeah.
I mean, Maclean's beginning to suspect something's weird because he's not getting the same level of documents crossing his desk, but he doesn't know. But he's behaving quite well by Foreign Office standards of the day, which sound quite good to me, Paul. They arrive at their desk at about 10. They go for lunch about 12:30 till about 3:30. Then they poodle off and get the 6 o'clock train home. I mean,
I knew I picked the wrong job.
I know. And God knows how he ran an empire, honestly. And every lunch is a 2-bottler. These guys are not messing, right? So one day in early May, I think it's the 15th, mid-May, Donald Maclean is in his office and Guy Burgess arrives at the door, and they have a sort of relatively meaningless chat, and Guy Burgess drops a note saying, here's where we're going to meet, you need to come and see me. So the watchers watch him going for a drink with Burgess, and another drink, and another drink, and another
Funnily
drink.
enough.
Yeah, at that point they don't know it's Burgess. It's like later on, you know. And that day they watched Donald Maclean getting absolutely. Can I swear on Spy Mark? I should know. I've spoiled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I have to mark the episode then?
Yeah. They watched Donald Maclean getting completely arseholed, and he stumbles out of this pub and into a taxi with the woman that he has picked up in the pub. And we don't know. I don't really know if it's the first time he's picked her up or whether they met there. And they head off in a taxi, and the MI5 watchers remark that she appears to be sitting upon his knee at this point. So Donald Maclean, rattled, drunk, about to be unmasked as a Soviet spy, goes to the York and Albany Hotel in Camden to drunkenly have sex with his new mistress. The watch continues for the next few days. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating detail. Did you enjoy reading? I mean, I do it in quite a lot of kind of choppy detail in the book of the watching because I found it so interesting.
Yeah, no, it really is interesting because this is something that you don't know because we just know about the escape. That it is fascinating to know what they were doing and how they were watching and how they were perceiving what they were seeing as well.
No, it's amazing. Like just being able to see, like, to read all the Watchers reports from the
Mm,
weeks preceding, and you're just literally spying on them, like you're a watcher. And like MacLean's going in and out of this club, and so and so's doing this, and then they realise that he's meeting Burgess a lot, and
it's
they
kind of funny though, the kind of erratic way these guys behave is almost cover, isn't it? The fact that
yeah,
they do daft things, that they do get drunk, that they do pick up women and take them home in taxis and things. It's something to be spied on that's interesting for the spot for them watching, not
yeah,
connected to spying, if you like.
yeah, it's chaotic. And they begin to understand that there's something weird going on between Burgess and Maclean. So one of them writes a report that arrives too late that basically says that they look really conspiratorial.
Mm,
And another one of the watchers also goes to his boss at MI5 who knows Burgess and says, look, what do we need to be worried about this character? Like he keeps meeting McLean, he
mm.
looks really dodgy. And this guy goes, oh no, that's just
That's
that's
just
just
him.
what Burgess is always like. He always looks like that. I'm sure it's nothing sinister, right? So, this is the background. Cairncross, meanwhile, oblivious. Blunt freaking out because Blunt knows all about what's going on. It's
Yeah,
Blunt
and
who
he's
tells.
seriously worried about Burgess because he knows he's going more and more off the rails by the minute.
Yeah, so Blunt and Modin, who is the handler at the point,
Mm,
are the kind of grown-ups in the room as McLean is a drunken, terrified wreck. He doesn't want to go. Melinda is pregnant. Melinda's his
mm.
wife. Although I did turn up quite strong evidence that the baby isn't actually
Yeah,
McLean's,
right.
but still. Um, I can't blame poor old Melinda, by the way. He was a horrible husband. He beat her and was, spying for the
Yeah,
Russians, so
yeah.
whatever. Um, so McLean's panicking. Burgess is, also in a kind of difficult position because his Foreign Office career is basically, he's been told in those weeks, he's got his own shit going on. He's been told his Foreign Office career is over.
Mm.
He's run out of second chances. This is it. He's a kind of washed up alcoholic has been as well, right? So Blunt's panicking, Modin's panicking, Moscow is panicking. Everybody is panicking. I mean, this is one of the things, again, it kind of everything feels with hindsight to be quite slick when you look at it
Yeah,
in
because
an
they got
hour
away
by
with it
hour.
essentially.
Yeah. When you look at it hour by hour, day by day, it's just frightened men behaving
Mm.
erratically. So yeah, and that takes us up to the day itself, I guess.
Yeah, well, and then of course Burgess suddenly turns. Well, he doesn't suddenly turn up. He rings and says, "I'm coming," and he turns up in a car and picks up McLean.
Yeah, he picks up McLean on the 25th of May, and they head off. That's a Friday. So they head off towards the Soviet Union. Now, there is an unanswered question about what Burgess was up to,
Yeah,
whether he intended to go at all, whether he intended to go halfway and then sneak back, whether he thought he could get McLean to Moscow and come back. Um, he told Blunt that he was under pressure from the Soviets to take McLean because McLean was too erratic.
right.
Modin's story is a little confused about whether he thought Burgess was going to come back.
And just to be clear, Modin was their handler.
The fact that Burgess went, there was no suspicion on Burgess. The fact that Burgess went too was a catastrophic blunder by Soviet intelligence. It brought the whole ring down.
Mm,
If it had just been McLean, Blunt, Cairncross, Philby probably wouldn't have, you know, come under that much suspicion because they hadn't had very much contact with him.
No, and I suppose with their influence waning in the sense, I mean, Cairncross was out of the picture and so on. With that going on, I suppose it's possible that they could have just then lived out their lives and it would have all gone away
Yeah, 100%.
until later on when it.
Well, I mean, Philby would have, Philby would have carried on being
Mm.
SIS CIA liaison in Washington, leaking everything left, right, and center.
But it would have been
Bl
down to his own mistakes at some point that would have been the thing
Yeah,
that would have to catch him out. Mm.
yeah, exactly. If it's just Maclean who goes, there would have obviously been a massive fallout and there would have
Mm.
been investigations. But the only reason why the others are immediately under suspicion is because of their links with Burgess. So it all emerges on the Monday morning that Maclean hasn't turned up for work. There are panicked phone calls between Blunt's friends between Burgess's friends when they realise that he's missing. It sort of slowly filters to the people who it matters. Then, we've watched the Soviets panic. Now we watch the British panic.
Yeah.
They are panicking. There's all this absurd thing that like they're going to send Dick White, who's the head of MI6, to go
Mm.
off to chase them down in Paris, but his passport has expired, and he's
You
wondering
couldn't
about
make that bit
flapping.
up.
Yeah. So, everybody's flapping. They don't, there have been some, there's been some talk that the British knew earlier than they've ever admitted that there was a phone call to Chartwell where Churchill
Mm.
was over the weekend, or that there, but actually the evidence for this is very thin. I went
Right.
looking, I couldn't find very much.
No, because what we do find is that SIS stations around the world, for instance, are only alerted on the 30th. And
Yeah.
by the 29th, these guys are already in Prague.
Yeah, so they're very slow. The problem that the British have straight away is the fact that Maclean was in Washington for so long. So
Mm.
it's really, really, really deeply embarrassing for their relationship with the Americans. And
So what is the
straight
exact
away,
reason then? What do you think that they didn't tell the Americans, that they didn't bring the Americans in?
well, they did, but they did bring the Americans in. It's just they were quite slow to bring the
Yeah.
Americans in, and they were always, and then you can see quite a lot of behind the scenes chat about, Christ, do we really have to tell the Americans this?
Mm.
Well, we don't want them to find out, and oh God, so they don't want to talk to the Americans about it. But I mean, I'm sure there are things and timings that they kind of obfuscate, but the Americans very quickly understand. I mean, it's in the press quite quickly. The Americans very quickly understand that there is something, something rotten in the
Mm.
state of Britain, and suspicion immediately falls on the people left behind, not just the ones we then subsequently, or we know are implicated, but on all their friends. Immediately, the suspicion falls. And that, of course, is very awkward for Philby and very awkward for Blunt.
Yeah, and if we have any kind of special relationship at this point, if we have any kind of value, it is through the intelligence world, really, isn't it? And it's obviously smashed by this. The American faith is destroyed.
The Americans are furious, and the British as well. I mean, this is so that they are in this bind about Philby because Philby obviously denies everything. So there's a lovely scene where Philby basically is in the room effectively when the telegram comes to say Burgess has
Mm.
left, and like all the colour drains from his face, and the woman in their room who's like managing the telegram, who is also Philby's lover, by the way, it kind of says, he looked visibly shocked. And he was really
Yeah,
shocked,
but
but not for the
misreading the
reasons.
reason for his shock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not yeah. So so Philby immediately knows he's really in trouble. The Americans, who, as you said earlier, had been a bit, or in week's episode, had begun to worry anyway about the leakiness of their operations into the Soviet Union. Very quickly, the Americans were pointing the finger at Philby
Mm.
because he was a known and close associate of Burgess. Philby's doing what he can to obfuscate. He eventually sends a message home to his boss saying, "Yes, I must reluctantly conclude that perhaps Guy Burgess might actually have been a spy. He was staying with me in Washington, and he had a couple of suspicious things I've subsequently found in his room, but I had no idea. Um, so, but basically, what now starts, Paul, is the long, torturous, horrific mission for British intelligence of actually proving
Yeah.
espionage. And it's hard. It's really hard. So I was incredibly fortunate and also incredibly unfortunate that just when I'd finished the book, at the end of 2024, I woke up one morning in January 2025 to discover that MI5 had released hundreds of
That's the nightmare of the
files.
writer, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was unbelievably lucky in the sense that I did get to read them all and put them in the book. I was unbelievably lucky in the fact I had to do it in about a month, and my eyes were bleeding and there
Right.
was
Yeah.
so much
Yeah.
information. But most of this stuff was about the subsequent investigations into Philby, Cairncross
Yes.
and
Right.
Blunt, and it is fascinating. And I used loads of it, but there's loads of it that I didn't get to use, and it is just amazing, amazing, amazing material. But basically, how do you prove somebody's a spy? Unless you catch them at it.
Yeah.
The only thing that they've really got to go on is the Venona stuff, right? The only evidence, but they can't. I mean, the Venona stuff is inadmissible. They couldn't possibly use it in court because, they can't possibly admit to anybody that they're reading these messages, and the Americans would be devastated. But so this is why they're watching Donald Maclean, because they want him to meet his handler,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And because that would give them something at least. But they can't. What they then subsequently realise, and they've realised it before when they're investigating other people, but when they were investigating people like Alan Nunn-May and Klaus Fuchs,
Hmm.
these guys were not good professional spies, right?
Yeah.
So they go into their interrogations. The interrogator says, "Are you a Soviet spy?" And they basically panic and go, "Yes, yes, I
Yes.
was. I'm so sorry." Right? But now they're up against Philby and Blunt, right? Who are not who like have been playing this game for
Yeah.
both the British and the Soviets for years.
For
They're
20
not,
years. Yeah.
yeah, they are not going to, you know, give in easily. So what happens is what subsequently happens is a decades long cat and mouse game between British intelligence, Kim Philby, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross, and it's completely fascinating.
It is actually because Peter Wright's involved in it at one point, and then when we get to the 70s, this is still being investigated, and Stella Rimington is part of the team that's involved in all this. And at the end of the 70s, you've still got Stella Rimington turning around and saying, well, basically, we don't have the evidence for Burgess and Maclean, let alone anything else. It's
Uh,
incredible.
it's incredible. So Stella Remington comes in as a sort of young officer, and I think it's almost like a kind of cold case review kind of thing. It's
Right.
almost
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
test of her chops as an investor, and she is brilliant and forensic, and she points out all the holes, and she finds all sorts of stuff that nobody had really noticed, particularly around John Cairncross, actually, who we haven't talked about very much in this
Mm.
episode, partly because he's the least glamorous of the five, but also, I don't know, he often gets overlooked. But what she does forensically and brilliantly is work out where his story is just nonsense and riddled with holes, right? So, I mean, she is brilliant. And I tried to get a lot of her conclusions into the book. But yeah, they've got nothing. There's one brilliant moment, actually, in the mid-50s where Guy Burgess, who is sadly, Paul, having a terrible time in Moscow, darling. He hates it. So he wants to come home, right? And MI5 basically panic because they kind of say, if he comes home, we cannot prove that he is a Soviet spy, even though the entire world knows that he's a Soviet spy. So if he comes home and he doesn't confess, we are going to look like such
Yeah.
numpties because we're not going to
And
be
they
able to
would
put
have
him
done. Yeah.
away. Yeah, they would. So they get Anthony Blunt to write to Guy Burgess and say, you caused such untold misery when you fled that if you come back, it will just reignite it all over again.
Honestly,
You
this
can't
is
do
the
that.
stuff you can't make up. It's so mad.
Oh, it's mad. It's completely mad. Yeah. I mean, all of that and this, all, that was in the new. I mean, among the stuff in the new files, there's so much stuff. There's one bit which I think is one of the is just extraordinary. So we've always known. So Kim Philby, they very early just realise that Kim Philby is implicated. They start investigating him. They're bugging him. They're interrogating him. They can't get anywhere at all.
Yeah.
So they get this brilliant barrister with the brilliant name of Helenus Buster Milmo to do a kind of formal interview with Philby to try and get like pick through the inconsistencies of his story. And we've always known, we've long known that this interview happened. What we got last January is that, and I urge anybody to look it up in the archives, it's unbelievable. It's the full transcript of Buster Milmo's interview with Philby, where, and I was talking to some other intelligence geeks the other day, and we were like, somebody should make a one-act play out of this because it's unbelievable. It's like these two men facing off against each other, and Milmo is forensic and brilliant, and he's like, well, how can you explain this and how can you explain that? And Philby's sort of like, well, I couldn't possibly, it's a mystery. How do you explain the fact that you say you barely knew Burgess, why does he have a copy of your degree certificate? Well, I don't know, that is a mystery. It's unbelievable. And then beautifully we have a record of Philby then getting a lift home from that interrogation from Jim Scarden, who's the main MI5 investigator. And Jim Scarden has a reputation for being brilliant because he managed to get a confession out of Klaus Fuchs, who would have confessed to a cabbage, honestly. So Jim Scarden is very overrated and he's completely fooled by all of them. And he gives Philby a lift home after this Milmo interview, and Philby is furious, right? Because Philby is not used to being made to feel small, right? And that's what's just happened to him. And he's insisting to Scarden in his car ride that it's all despicable, and Scarden's totally sympathetic. He's like, poor old Philby, poor old Philby. All of this seems a bit unfair. He seems like quite a decent chap, but blah blah blah. Anyway, so it's all there, and it's all just fascinating stuff, and it's all kind of laid out in the archives, waiting for me to pounce upon it and turn it into a book. It was just amazing. It was so intoxicating.
It's a good illustration of character as well, though, because when you look at Fuchs, he's riddled with guilt, and he's ready to confess. Yeah, and as you point out, he's a scientist. He's not a professional spy in any way.
Yeah.
But what you can see about Philby is the man's a complete narcissist for a start, I think. The ego and playing God must have been a part of the fun he was having in doing what he was doing, acting as this spy. But he's just capable of completely lying without thinking about it twice. There is no guilt. There's nothing in this guy, is there, anywhere?
Philby's horrible. I mean, he is genuinely horrible. He he betrays all his friends. He gives like nasty little pen portraits to the Soviets. I think his default reaction to other people is one of contempt. He's cleverer than them. He's better than them. He is so vile to his wife, Eileen. So Eileen's always had a really bad rap because she had mental health problems, but she was living with at one point, when she's living in a house and she's got Guy Burgess in the basement, 5 young children, Philby's mistress installed in the attic, right?
Yeah, no.
And and then she has this sort of mental breakdown, and she injects urine into her skin, and she comes out of these like terrible boils, and then she kind of has this sort of pretend instant where she's attacked by someone. So she's like seriously troubled, but with provocation. And then all his friends are so sympathetic to dear Philby, dear Kim, having to put up with mad Eileen.
Yes.
And then when he's being watched by MI5, because everybody knows that he's guilty, but they can't prove it, and he's been sacked off by intelligence. He can't get a job. He's living on handouts from his father and Russian intelligence, and he is drinking heavily. He's taking lots of drugs to kind of get up in the morning and then to go to sleep at night. He's got at least one mistress. And the MI5 guys watching him at that period in the 50s talk about him behaving towards Eileen with drunken brutality. Now, these MI5 guys were not like shrinking violets, right? You have to be behaving quite badly for them to say that. And then Eileen commits suicide, and her psychiatrist, who's obviously privy to an awful lot, is absolutely convinced that Philby is responsible. And he rings her GP and says, "Did you check for puncture marks on her body before you declared it suicide?" And even, Anthony Blunt, who's been friends with Philby since they were very young men, in one of his later interrogations, one of the interrogators said to him, there is this idea that Philby killed Eileen, and Blunt said, "I don't know, but he's ruthless enough. He could have
Mm.
done." Um,
No, and his reaction to it is just, it's
yeah, he's
so cold.
delighted when she dies. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He frees her up and he marries the nice Eleanor, who is quite nice. I feel sorry for Eleanor. And then later on, of course, when they're all in Moscow and they're all kind of like an island of traitors in a kind of indifferent Moscow, Philby shags Melinda MacLean.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's nice. Although I don't blame Melinda either, because she jumps from bed with like strangling, wife beating Donald into bed with kind of charming, seemingly nice Kim. I
Yeah,
don't know.
and in an environment that probably none of them wanted to be in. It kind of comes back to this thing, this Anglo-centric exceptionalism.
Mm.
It's a kind of odd thing. I remember at the Joan of Arc, the Bernard Shaw play, and
Mm.
there's a part in there where Joan is giving testimony, and an English bishop scoffs, and the Frenchman turns around and says, well, we know why he doesn't believe her testimony because it's in French, and of course God would speak English.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can sense the sort of weird truth in that. But these were just misfits. They would never have fitted in Moscow anyway. They weren't. They were communists. Yeah, they had their ideology and everything else, but they were never going to be the
Mm.
kind of people who fitted in, were they?
No, although I mean Maclean did a little bit. We don't know very
Mm,
much about Maclean's life in Moscow. He seems to have been happier. I think he was always sort of slightly sort of more reserved and um more sort of dry in his pursuits. And he after Melinda leaves him, he sort of stops drinking for a bit, and that helps. And he sort of works for various think tanks, writing
mm.
indigestible books about why American foreign policy is evil. Um, yeah, I mean Philby and Burgess aren't very happy. Oh, sad.
It's horrible. Yeah. Um, there are a few things. We've got Galitzin's testimony and Fiona Solomon. There are a few times when there's information that does talk about Philby and does suggest he's a spy before he actually leaves.
So the Solomon thing is really interesting. So Philby, Blunt, and Cairncross have basically fended off MI5 all through the 50s. They can't pin anything down. They're trying to. There's lots of, they are trying to. I think they get a bad rep subsequently for not trying. They were trying very hard. Um, Galitzin, who's a Soviet defector, sort of emerges and says, talks about the Ring of Five, that reignites the whole thing, blah,
Mm,
blah, blah. Then there's this incident with Flora Solomon. Now, the story before my book goes, Flora Solomon, who was a friend of Eileen and
Eileen, right.
Philby, she introduced them, and that Philby gets a job in Beirut as a journalist, and she's disturbed because he's writing quite anti-Zionist stuff in the newspapers, and she has a fit of conscience. She goes to Victor Rothschild, who is this sort of, he'd worked in MI5 during the war. He's friends with all
Yeah.
the five. He's a really, really influential establishment figure. She says to Victor Rothschild, "Philby tried to recruit me. He's a spy." And Victor Rothschild tells MI5, and that's what reignites the investigation. Now, this only makes sense if Victor Rothschild did not know that Kim Philby was a Soviet agent.
Right.
But the rediscovered memoir of a Soviet KGB general called Ivan Serov says explicitly that Victor Rothschild knew all about the activities of the five and used them to pass information to the Soviets. He was absolutely an agent of influence of the Soviets, and he was embedded in the Five's treachery. So if that's true, none of the Solomon Rothschild story doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. No.
So what I discovered in the new files was that the weirdness of the Flora Solomon testimony. So she goes to MI5 and she says, look, Philby recruited me. And then they're
Mm.
like, oh, brilliant. We've got this new source. Tell us everything. And then she won't tell them anything else. She
Right.
just
Yeah.
keeps
Yeah.
saying that. She tells them so little that they end up going to Israeli intelligence and saying, can you put pressure on
Right.
Flora Solomon because she's behaving really weirdly. She's given up Philby, but she won't say anything else. She won't talk about anybody else. She won't give any details. So my theory, for what it's worth, is which is informed by how Victor Rothschild subsequently acts during the spy catcher affair,
Mm.
where he's trying to manipulate everything behind the scenes. He sees himself as a kind of puppet master. So my theory is that Victor Rothschild is a Soviet sphere of influence person. He agent of influence. He finds out, because he's so well connected with the British intelligence, that the Galitzin stuff is reigniting the whole thing.
Mm.
He has spent the whole 50s being questioned, bugged, and bothered by
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
MI5. Because not only him but his wife were very close to Burgess and Blunt. And he's like, I can't, I'm preempting this. So it's a preempt for Victor Rothschild. He gets Flora Solomon to shop Philby. It's a preempt so that he can be the one who is instrumental in the bringing down of Philby.
Right.
And it, gets him out of jail with MI5. So that's my theory. Because otherwise, none of it makes sense. If you
No,
look
that
at Flora,
does make sense of a situation that, as you point out, doesn't make sense otherwise.
yeah.
So we get to 63. We get
Mm.
to Philby in Beirut, and
Mm.
Philby meeting Elliot and then disappearing. And that's been something that's attracted a lot of myth and attention over the years. Like, was he warned off? Were they happier that he went? Because if he went, it meant we weren't going to face a trial, and so on and so on. And
Mm.
what's your take there?
Right. Brilliant question. Love this question. So, before the files,
Finally, I got a good question in.
oh no, they've all been brilliant. Paul. This one is just my favorite question. So, before the files came out in January last year that I told you about, I was
Mhm.
very firmly in the cock up, not conspiracy camp, because I
Right,
normally am. Right? There was no
right,
evidence to suggest that MI6 let him go. Blah blah blah. There are a couple of nuggets in the files that were released in January that have persuaded me
right.
otherwise. They are inconclusive, so this is still an open question. I want to be very clear about that. So, Nicholas Elliott goes out to confront Philby, and first of all, their first meeting, all the files have all come, like what is available has all come out, right? But the first meeting between Elliott and Philby is actually not in the files. Where is that? We still don't know
Right.
about their first encounter.
Mm.
Not only that, Elliot's kind of transcripts and notes about it seem very weird. They're kind of uber polite, it's all very odd.
Mm.
You add to the fact that MI5 are furious that Nicholas Elliott, an MI6 man, is kind of conducting this confrontation with Philby because it's MI5 who are trying to get Philby. It's a counterintelligence thing, right? So MI5, the kind of telegram goes back, Philby's confessed. MI5 basically sends loads of questions. We need to know the answers to all these questions. And then there's no evidence that any of MI5's urgent questions were put to Philby.
Yeah, right.
Then what we have is they tell the Americans that Philby has confessed, and then they say, it's a very delicate moment. We're debriefing Philby, a debrief of which there is no evidence of. We're debriefing Philby. Please don't, send your own men to talk to him or like watch him too closely because we don't want him to get spooked and stop telling us shit, right? So maybe that's not disingenuous. Maybe they really did not want to spook Philby in this
But
debrief,
on
but
the
we've got
other
no
hand,
evidence for. But on the other hand, maybe they're telling the Americans to stay away because they don't want anybody to watch Philby when he's making the arrangements to leave, right? There's one other piece of the puzzle. Nicholas Elliott goes out there, supposedly gets this confession, and then he leaves, right? Leaving Philby in the care of the bureau chief in Beirut, whose name is Peter Lunn. Now, when the whole ring blew up in 1951, the minute that Burgess and Maclean left, it was their very closest friends who triggered investigation. And among the men who was investigated in May 1951, right at the beginning, was Peter Lunn, who was the station chief when Philby disappears. There is no file that has been released yet on Peter Lunn. All the other files have been released, right? I've seen all the files of almost all the people who were investigating that period have now been released, not Peter Lunn's. We haven't seen it. Then he disappears from the investigation. The only time he then pops up again is as the station chief in Beirut when Philby. So at this point, it's like days after the confession when Philby disappears. Lunn is either utterly incompetent or he's implicated. There's just no two.
Yeah,
there's
no other way of looking at it. Yeah.
And I don't think he's implicated by the Soviets. I'm not saying that he was investigated, but all I'm saying is his relationship to Philby and Burgess and Blunt is longer standing. We don't know very much about him. Where's his file? How was he so incompetent? I mean, this is for further study. I await his file. So if you're listening, National Archives people, please, I want that file.
please put the file out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because one of the things about Philby is, of course, that even when he's confessing to an extent, he's still a mendacious person. Let's say he doesn't tell the truth, and he says, I did it during the war when we were fighting the Nazis, and never very honest, is he?
His confession is nonsense. I mean, it's complete. Oh, well, it's not nonsense. What Philby is brilliant at is selective truth telling. So it feels authentic, but the important bits are changed, and the omissions are sort of seismic. And later on, he writes a memoir. So he writes a memoir that comes out in the UK in 1968, I think. And
68.
It is, again, it's exactly the same. It's like Mr. X and, full of lies of omission. And it's also, very Philby. It's very stylish. It's very carefully constructed. You get this image of this kind of debonair, kind of raffish, kind of rebel who is sort of, who you'd like to go for a drink with, really. But yeah, full of lies.
And as you point out, we don't want to let Cairncross or Blunt off in this discussion at all. But we get to, when you look at those two guys and what happens with them, we know that they one of them dies, the other one, they both die, but they live out their lives, But Cairncross gets picked up in the United States and makes a confession. Goromri Rees names Blunt. Blunt makes a confession. All of this happens many years before we get to find out what's actually gone on. And in fact, with Blunt, it doesn't come around until the book, The Climate of Treason, was it Anthony Boyle in 1979. And that forces Margaret Thatcher to make a statement in the House of Commons. So it's that late. But actually, we know about this in the 1960s, don't we?
Yeah, so this is so interesting. It's such an interesting period, and I did some stuff on it, but I think there's a lot more to be done. Stella Rimington, we discussed, did this kind of re-investigation, and she was very suspicious. She said it's really weird because there's another one, Michael Straight. So it's Michael Straight who was recruited by Anthony Blunt. He confesses, and that pushes them towards Blunt. And she's like, we didn't really have much new on these guys, and yet all of them suddenly confess within about 6 weeks of each other and don't really try. And you read the transcript of the interview where Blunt confessed, which came out in those new files, and it's a wonderful moment. But basically the MI5 guy goes in and says, we've got some new information, come on Anthony, it's time. And Anthony Blunt says, look, just give me a minute to wrestle with my conscience. He stands up and he walks to the elegant windows of his flat overlooking Portman Square, and he wrestles with his conscience and takes a sip of his whiskey, and he comes and he sits down. He says, yes, fair cop. And Stella Rimington later on finds this all very, very suspicious. Why are these guys all confessing? And, I think this remains an open question that could definitely...
Yeah. Which is a big point you make in the book at this point, that these are odd confessions.
Yeah, these are very odd and they're limited. Now, and then in terms of what happens next. So MI5 only got these confessions. Well, maybe they only got them because the Soviets told them to confess. But let's take it on face value. MI5 only got these confessions because they offered effectively immunity from prosecution. It's a little bit more complicated with Cairncross, but effectively, you confess, we will not prosecute. We just need to know now, right? And part of the issue is that MI5 still think that there might be somebody in MI5 that they haven't picked up, and some of these guys, there's some concern about Roger Hollis, who was one of the major
Yeah,
guys in
right.
MI5. So their worry at this point is that there is an undetected spy who could still be wreaking havoc, and they need Blunt and Cairncross to pin this down. So this is why they make the deal. This is why they subsequently don't, they escape
Prosecute or
prosecution.
anything, no.
Although later on, again, a new generation of MI5 agents come in and say we gave these too easily,
Mm.
and we've discovered, and most of what they confessed to, we've discovered they were lying. So we've got grounds for revoking the deal and kind of prosecuting anew. So it was very near, like it wasn't quite a done deal either.
No, right. Mm.
So they use Blunt and Cairncross to try and get at other spies. So they kind of mic them up and they send them to lunch with people they suspect. And James Klugman's the big one. So James Klugman was a open communist who
Mm.
had been instrumental in getting Churchill to support Tito when Klugman was working for SOE in
Yeah,
Yugoslavia.
right.
So they're after Klugman. They send Cairncross to go and try and pin him down. I mean, Klugman is not stupid, so he evades Cairncross quite easily. So all of this is going on, and and all of that is, you can see through the files. And like Anthony Blunt, he does escape prosecution. He doesn't end up miserable in Moscow. He doesn't end up very miserable. He is, you know, interrogated over and over and over again, like 80 times or something, by
Right.
MI5. He becomes, like, in some of the meetings, he's so overwhelmed and sort of drinks himself into insensibility, and he has to be kind of carried out. He develops ulcers. He's blackmailed by former friends and lovers. I don't know if he ever finds out, but like, he's being informed on by people to MI5 that
Yeah,
he
around
considers
him.
his
Mm.
closest friends in the world. It is not. I know everybody always kind of goes, "Oh, well, he got away with it." He had a very, very, very unhappy afterlife.
Mm.
I don't. I'm not sad for him, but I'm just saying it was
Yeah, but
not
there's a
a.
reality there that should be
Yeah,
recognized. Yeah.
yeah. It was not. He did not just sit around looking at the Queen's pictures, giggling to himself
Mm.
gleefully. Right. This was not how it worked out for Blunt.
So looking at the thing now from our perspective now, I suppose there was a tendency at the time to think, okay, well, when the wall fell and the Russian Empire collapsed, that was sort of the end of it. But it's not the end of it, really, is it? These guys are revered by Putin's Kremlin, and are irrelevant to the modern Russia and the situation we now find ourselves back in with Russia all over again.
This is so interesting, Paul, and I really want someone with kind of, better Russian, or indeed any Russian, and kind of a uh, handle on modern Putinism to do some work on this, because they were kind of largely forgotten, and then they've been resurrected by Putin. And sort of, particularly, there's a couple of historians who are running a Russian website under the auspices of, which is state owned and run effectively, talking about, addressing the real truth of the Cambridge Five. And obviously you can imagine what the kind of content is in there.
Mm.
Um, there have been, in recent years, plaques unveiled. There's a Kim Philby Square. There is a statue of Kim Philby at Kursk. I mean, it's Philby who they kind of concentrate on. And I think
Mm.
that's because for Putin as an ex-KGB officer, even though I don't think Philby was the most consequential, I think it was probably Donald Maclean who made the most difference.
Right.
Because Philby was, an intelligence officer acting as a Soviet agent. He's in a
Mm.
world that Putin is sort of, familiar with and drawn to. So in terms, if he's like the
And we've kind of weighted
intelligence.
it that way too, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. Because he's like, because, and it's also partly because we didn't really talk about this, but like there was a long time where the public suspected Philby and he was like
Mm.
wiggling his way off the hook in public and it was becoming like a soap opera, right?
Mm.
So, so there's lots of reason why Philby gets all the attention. And certainly in modern Russia. So they're being sort of they've become emblems of a kind of noble anti-fascist
Mm.
Russian tradition that is invoked in the current war against Ukraine, which is extraordinary because they were avowed anti-imperialists, anti-nationalists,
Mm.
they were internationalists, and
Yeah.
now they're being kind of used as props in a kind of power play by a nationalist kind of
I suppose the
semi-fascist.
thing
It's
that
extraordinary.
illustrates, though, and is illustrated all along, is that we weren't talking about communism in any idealistic sense or any ideological sense, even. It was about Stalin and Stalinism and dictatorship, and it
Yeah,
always was. That was always
yeah,
what was behind it. You could talk about the Comintern or anything else you want to talk about. It was always about the power.
yeah. It was. Although I do think they were kind of. I do think they were. I do think they were ideologues, and I do
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
they
yeah,
believed in the theory.
yeah.
And I
Well,
also think that, part of the story that has become true, and this isn't really a Cambridge 5 point, is that part of the myth is that, Stalin invented terror and that he made a system go bad. But, Lenin invented terror, right?
yeah, yeah.
Lenin killed and imprisoned more people in the first like month of his Red Terror than the Tsarist empire had
Mm.
done for like the previous 50 years or something. Like it's like this is not in the modern parlance. The violence and the misery is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. No, I take your point. I mean, I like the way actually apostles is important. You say Stalin's apostles. The apostles are important in the context. It's a sort of a motif that runs through the book, and I find myself doing it the other way around. When you talk about the 16th century and you talk about Protestantism and Catholicism and Europe and Britain and the fight that was going on at that time and the spies and everything else that was involved in that, I kind of see that in a sort of Cold War context, and it's interesting, isn't it? You
Oh, a
sort of.
hundred percent. Like so, my previous, published things. I wrote two novels set in the 17th century, and when I came back to the 20th century, which was, the sort of Russian Revolution stuff was one of my great loves as
Mm.
to study. That kind of link between the millenarianism of kind of 17th century Puritanism and the effective kind of millenarianism streak that runs through the sort of Soviet ideology. It was
Yeah,
absolutely fascinating. And I read some brilliant books on that as well about that the kind of crossover between those two mentalities. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely
and it's
fascinating.
expressing it as a faith is a way of really illustrating just how deeply ingrained it all is. So this takes us to, I suppose, the last serious question, or not the serious question, but in a way, almost to sum up. It's really about the when we talked about the Soviet Empire and
Hmm.
the thesis of the book in the first place. To come back to that, it's about the shape of Europe that developed after the Second World War and how much these guys actually played a part in it winding up like that. So we have the fact that real people died because of the stuff these guys did, but we also have the fact that Europe was shaped the way it was, partly because of what these guys did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem, I guess, is a quantification one, right?
Mm.
Like, obviously,
Yeah.
when I was trying to sell this book to my publisher, they were like, okay, but how much difference? Like, how much blood? How many corpses? Like, put a number, put
The
an
only answer to
amount,
that
put
is
a
42.793%.
yeah, exactly. And like, so, and the temptation when you write any book is to over exaggerate the importance of the people that you're
Mm.
writing about because, otherwise, who cares? Why are you reading the book? So I'm quite careful around this question, and I, without being Weasley, without meaning to be Weasley, I give a quite Weasley answer.
Mm.
Without the Cambridge Five, does Stalin end up with a Soviet empire that stretches, from Moscow and
Yeah.
across most of Eastern and Central Europe? And I think the answer is probably yes, he does,
Mm.
actually. However,
Yes.
were they incredibly helpful in him gaining control
Yeah.
in the way that he
Facilitating.
did? Yes, they were. And they were very helpful, and they were very helpful gleefully and happily in the advancement of that project, which brought utter misery to millions of people.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Did you, I mean, how long were you researching this?
Oh, yeah.
When did you
Well,
get the idea that you were going to do this? Write your first non-fiction, and it was going to be these guys. I mean, you've had an interest in intelligence, obviously, for years anyway. You studied under
yeah,
Christopher Andrews, I think, for a start, didn't
I
you?
did. I did it as intelligent history as an undergraduate, and I loved it. So, well, I'd always been fascinated by them, and I think it was during COVID. I was reading a lot. I was, as everybody, and I kept thinking that this was the book I wanted to read. I read about them. I was like, okay, fine. I know an
Mm.
awful lot about Guy Burgess's sex life, but what did he actually do,
Yeah,
right? What did
yeah.
actually
And when it comes to Blunt and Cairncross, there's even less known about what they
Blunt and
actually did.
Cairncross particularly,
Mm.
yeah. Like, I mean, there's a couple of good biographies about Cairncross now, actually, but he gets kind of overlooked. And also, there are two good biographies about Cairncross, but they are, adjuncts. Whereas he's part of this story. He is one of the five. So, I, yeah. So for a long time is the answer. I mean, I don't know exactly. I think on and off, sort of 4 years, and obviously, I had to go. I was looking in archives not in this country, and that was quite difficult
Right,
to
yeah,
get
yeah.
hold of and to translate and to work through. And then, yeah, and then there was that mad panic at the end with the big releases from MI5, because there were loads of big releases in 22 as well. So in terms of my ability to write this book, I I feel very blessed to be able to do so much from the archives. And actually what's interesting is then you go back and so much of what was written before is actually brilliant considering how little archival material there
Yeah,
was.
right.
So lots of people have done incredible work on these guys, and I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants with the MI5 files in my hands.
What about then? I mean, I think we talked about this before, but what kind of spy would Antonia make?
Oh, shit one. I can't keep a secret, Paul. I mean, when one of the reasons I did my intelligence history course back in Cambridge was because the word on the street was that Christopher Andrew was a recruiter and he'd give you the tap on the shoulder
Right.
if he thought you. And I was like, come on, all the time I wanted
I'm
that
here.
tap. I'm here. But yeah, astonishingly, it never came. I'd be absolutely dreadful. I cannot keep a secret.
Not a Philby, no. I
I
tell you
am
what,
definitely
I was
not
going to
Philby.
ask you for a recommendation, and I don't mind if you make a recommendation, but I was wondering if it might be more helpful. We'll draw up a list of books maybe, and I can put that on the program notes. So it's entirely up to you. But if you want to say something in particular now,
About other books about these
a book in
guys.
particular or something, recommendation.
I mean, honestly, my recommendation is go if you're interested in this stuff, have a poodle around in the archives, because
Right. Yeah.
all of these files that were released in 2025, they've all been digitized, right?
Right.
So you can go on anybody can go on the National Archives website, look up, Kim Philby, and have access free to a load of the digitized reports on this that make fascinating reading. And I've done the hard work for you, so you don't have to, right? You can just read my book. If you're really interested, it's just a complete treasure trove of stuff. I really recommend it. Um, yeah.
Okay. And we'll give you one last chance to have another plug. Go on. You were good, actually. I thought you might plug it in the middle, but you didn't.
What, the book?
The book. I mean, we've been talking about it, of course, but
Yeah, listen, buy the book, for God's sake, please, because, I want to keep writing about intelligence history and I want to write more books. And the best way I can do that is if lots of people buy it and my publishers love me. So make my publishers love me.
do you have an
Pre-order
idea
this
for another
book.
book?
I do, but then I'd have to kill you. So,
Okay, fair enough.
maybe I am a
Well,
bit Philby.
at that point, we're going to leave it for sure. Antonia, that's been an awful lot of fun. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Paul.
So being a bit of a rotter, what I can tell you is that Antonia did tell me what she's thinking about for her next book, and it sounds absolutely fascinating. So I hope we can look forward to that in the future. A big thank you to Antonia for chatting about Stalin's Apostles today. It's been brilliant getting a take on the book, and if you want to order a copy, you can get it from all good book outlets. If you want to order it from us, you can click the link on the program notes and you can get it there. You certainly have a flavour now of what Stalin's Apostles is about. So, you've been listening to Spy Masters. You've been listening to me chatting to Antonia Senior about Stalin's Apostles. I will be back very shortly with another interview. In the meantime, bye for now, and thank you very much for listening.